Welcome to the Ways and Means Subcommittee field hearing on Opportunity Zones, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And the subcommittee will please come to order. Welcome to Erie, Pennsylvania. And I say that to my colleagues who are up here at the desk. I don't think they expected to see this type of a turnout. This is incredible. So I see Senator Laughlin. We're used to this type of turnout anytime we get together, right? Brad, everybody's here with us. So listen, our team is very excited to have you here today for this field hearing on the success story of Erie's Opportunity Zone and how this committee can create opportunities for areas such as Erie to thrive in the Rust Belt and throughout the country. Thank you, Chairman Smith and your team, for all your hard work that you've done these past few months to bring this committee to Western Pennsylvania. I also want to take a moment to thank all those in this community who have helped my team and I make this event such a success. And without your efforts, none of this could be done. You're all the epitome of what makes Erie thrive, and we are here today because of your dedication to protecting and revitalizing this community. For those of you unfamiliar with Erie residents are proud of their rich history. In the 1600s, the Erie's Indians first settled on the lake shore. The French later controlled the region, building a fort on Presque Isle, which they would later play a pivotal role in the War of 1812. Lake Erie served as a hub for the U.S. Navy's fleet. The brigs Niagara and Lawrence helped secure victory in the 1813 Battle of Lake Erie. The reconstructed Oliver Hazard Perry's flagship, the U.S. brig Niagara, sails in the lake in Erie off the Presque Isle Bay. It's responsible for Erie's nickname, the flagship city. Now, after the war and through the 1900s, Erie grew rapidly with busy rail lines and ports. Manufacturing jobs attracted waves of immigrants to the northwest corner of Pennsylvania. The population of Erie peaked in 1960 with 140,000 residents. Like many areas in the Rust Belt, Erie experienced the loss of good-paying manufacturing jobs and suffered perpetual population decline. Today, Erie's population sits at just around 90,000 people. The downtown zip code, 16501, became home to one of the poorest zip codes in the United States. But as I mentioned, Western Pennsylvanians are proud of our history and have deep pride in the area where we live. With many folks born and raised in these towns and choosing to raise the next generation right here in Erie, we have a vested interest in making our communities thrive like they did in our parents' and grandparents' generations. It was recently stated that Erie is a city with a can-do attitude, great work ethic, and a true sense of community and family. Because of this, Erie community leaders came together to begin the revitalization efforts. With the help from key stakeholders and pivotal leaders in the community, the Erie Refocused Plan took shape, and the Erie Downtown Development Corporation began their work through property development in the summer of 2017. Major employers in downtown Erie, including Mr. Tom Hagen with Erie Insurance, local universities, and the city's top hospitals partnered together to provide the initial funding to launch investment and development. Back in Washington, a bipartisan group of members led by former Representatives Pat Tiberi and Ron Kind and Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker introduced the original Opportunity Zone legislation. This legislation, later added to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, had nearly 100 bipartisan sponsors, which is hard to do in the government we're in today. Opportunity zones were designed to provide tax incentives that encourage long-term private capital investment to revitalize low-income areas. The Opportunity Zone program was able to facilitate the type of investments that would best serve the community's needs. With the new Opportunity Zone legislation and Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, investors turned to Erie. After years of work and leadership from the Erie Downtown Development Corporation and local stakeholders, Erie has welcomed 110 new residential spaces, created space for 25 new businesses, restored 8 historic properties, revitalized over 100,000 square feet of new commercial space, and established a grocery store in what was previously designated a food desert. Erie Downtown Development Corporation stakeholders have leveraged $40 million in private capital into a $115 million investment throughout the downtown Erie Opportunity Zone. But our work on Opportunity Zones is not yet finished. Now, I'm proud to lead the Opportunity Zones Transparency, Extension, and Improvement Act with my colleagues, Representatives Dan Kildee, Carol Miller, and Terry Sewell. This legislation strengthens the opportunity zones with reporting requirements along with expanded incentives to help those communities that need it most. Last year, the Ways and Means Committee passed the Small Business Jobs Act, which included these reporting requirements as well as new rural opportunity zone program that will revitalize struggling communities in our heartlands. A way to ensure cities and towns, regardless of their population, can benefit from this legislation. I look forward to working with others on these bills and other opportunity zone legislation as we head into 2025. Additionally, we have seen on this Main Street in downtown Erie that success extends to the businesses beyond downtown. Manufacturing has been a large part of Erie's history and employs 25% of this community. These jobs, especially those in family-owned businesses, are the backbone of this community. This is why the Ways and Means Committee have been committed to extending and expanding pro-growth tax policy like immediate expensing for R&D and 100% bonus depreciation, so we can give companies the tools they need to invest in their factories, their equipment, and most importantly, their workers. This will allow for Americans to remain more competitive in a global economy and keep folks on the job right here at home. Finally, I'm happy to have this panel of witnesses with us today to testify on the success of opportunity zones, the impact in this community, as well as other tax provisions that impact the manufacturing industry in the Erie community. Before I turn this over, I think that too often people have talked about it, but Erie in the past tense. And for those of us that are familiar with Erie, know we would never, ever, ever give up on who we are, what we are, and who made us what we are. Opportunity zones became something that we never expected to have happen, yet Erie embraced it right from the beginning and has turned itself around. This is an incredible tribute to this community, the people who live here, the people who work here, and the people who came here to begin with to start a family and to have a strong community. Now, I'm privileged to have with me several of our members, and now it is my honor to recognize the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, for her opening statement. Ms. Moore.
Oh, thank you so very much, Mr. Kelly, and thank you for inviting us to this beautiful community, another great place on a great lake. I hail from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Mr. Hawkins, I don't think Cleveland is a mistake on the lake. I do think that, you know, while we talk about this being the Rust Belt region, we should just reimagine it as we're doing here today and call it the Fresh Coast. I think we're going to see a lot of immigration to this area because these Great Lakes are a great hidden secret of not only these United States, but this world. I have enjoyed my visit here with Erie. I just want to thank Mr. Whiting for having lunch with us today. And I was listening, although my ears are not as good, to try to catch some of the other just subtle sort of nuances. I know that you have a great testimony here today. And of course, Mr. Hawkins, nice to see you again. You're the power behind the throne. And just really want to congratulate Senator Scott and my own senator, retired Representative Ron Kine, for introducing this and pushing us to this point where we can look at how to renew it and how to improve it. It's really obvious that it's hard to track the impact of opportunity zones given the lack of reporting requirements and transparency by investors. And that holds true in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But I'm aware of some of the important investments that have occurred in my own district, and I just hope we can hold on and I can share that with you. For example, the Good City Brewing Company was one of the first companies in the region to use the Federal Opportunity Zone Program, which attracted investors to bring cash into a deal in the facility in the Century City Business Park. The Century City Business Park is a 44,000 square foot empty space in a building that was the headquarters of the old A.O. Smith factory, which at one time employed 30,000 people who lived in what is now the inner city of Milwaukee. And then there was Talbo's rail car refurbishing facility, the second tenant. That was good news. Now, the Central City Business Park is in a real tough part of the neighborhood, and the entire area is in dire need of rehabilitation. So it wasn't a surprise to me that Milwaukee had to use public funds to kind of bail out the business park. But that was only temporary. And we can boast that the Central City building located on the northwest side is 100% leased and occupied. And just last month, the Craft Beverage Warehouse announced that it's looking to develop a new facility in the business park. That said, I'm also aware that opportunity projects funded that I wonder whether they're the best use for funds for the community, such as some of the condo projects that cater to higher incomes. So that's just a taste of what we're seeing in Milwaukee. So to the witnesses here today, thank you for coming. I look forward to hearing more of your testimony. Now, Mr. Chairman, as we explore the opportunity zones,
yes, ma'am,
it's important to be clear-eyed about what we're talking about here. The tax benefit conferred on taxpayers who invest in qualified opportunity funds are tax benefits for the rich. Now, in fact, the Joint Committee on Taxation found that the average income for a qualified opportunity fund investor is nearly $1.1 million a year. Now, I know that you're going to start rolling your eyes, especially the chairman of the full committee, and say, here we go again, these liberal Democrats going on about tax cuts for the rich. But I'm going to surprise you here today, Chairman. I get it. That's in many parts of the country, Erie being one of them, Mr. Hawkins, they need capital, and they need private investment. And I can understand why we might need a program to encourage that kind of private investment in areas where the return on capital might not otherwise be so great. And even though I know people are looking for capital and look for people who need money, you're not going to hear me say these are tax cuts for the rich, full stop. I don't have unlimited time. I'm just the ranking member here. But I just need to make one last point, Mr. Chairman, and that is that I think that we just need to work further to make sure that there's a connection between enriching the richest investors and making sure that there's a real solid public purpose for this funding, because this is being funded by taxpayers. And so I just want to say before I go, I got pages to go, but like Drake would say, I'm the ranking member here today, so I take certain privileges, and I sit on that lower dais in D.C., but I'm like Drake, started from the bottom, now I'm here, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. That's very good testimony, good opening remarks. I will say this, though, if I may. Because I remember when we were doing opportunity zones, and one of the complaints was you were only concerned about the wealthy people, and my answer to that was, well, they have the money to invest, using before tax dollars to invest where nobody else would invest because it didn't look like a promising thing. We encourage people to invest in their communities, to make a change in a community that had been forgotten, had been pushed aside, and nobody was going into. This, by the way, was able to bring those folks to saying, you know what, I will take a chance. I will invest in there using not taxpayer-funded revenues, but using private dollars. So with that, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. Let me first begin by thanking you for hosting us here in your beautiful city, and also to the Warner Theater for hosting us today. Beautiful. And I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. I believe it's extremely important to go outside of Washington and see real America and see how we can make policy that benefits rural America, but also see policies that does not benefit real America. I'm also sure I speak for all who participated how gratifying and informative today's tour of the Erie Opportunity Zones was in helping paint a fuller picture of the true value of the program. The Ways and Means Committee is in Erie, Pennsylvania, because it is home to a true American success story that was born out of the hard work of the local community and common sense economic policies. Erie was once home to the poorest zip code in the nation. But that changed, in part because of the 2017 Trump tax cuts that not only lowered the tax burden on low-income families and raised wages, but also made critical investments in the strength and vitality of local communities through the Opportunity Zone program established under the law. Opportunity zones have sparked a flood of private investment in communities most in need of an economic boost. And in Erie, over $750 million has flowed to support the local community. Again, those are private sector dollars, not federal funds. The Ways and Means Committee is working to build on the success of the Trump tax cuts, and that includes the Opportunity Zones program. In June of last year, the committee approved the Small Business Jobs Act, legislation to incentivize investment in America's Main Street businesses, to make it easier for them to grow and create jobs, while also expanding the Opportunity Zone program to incorporate more rural communities. A key piece of that legislation was authored by our tax subcommittee chairman, Kelly, and includes important reporting requirements to ensure opportunity zones are being set up in accordance with the law and delivering on the promise of the policy. At the Ways and Means Committee, we have made substantial progress towards supporting Main Street businesses that are building stronger communities. There is more to be done, a lot more to be done. We are in Erie to hear your thoughts about the importance of these tax provisions, because it's clear President Biden isn't listening. President Biden has pledged to let the Trump tax cuts expire. We know what that means for local economies like Erie. Starting in 2026, the average family of four in Erie earning just shy of $60,000 will see their taxes go up by over $1,200 per year upon expiration of those 2017 tax cuts. We know the small businesses that are the engine of growth in our opportunity zones will face a top rate well over 40%. The families who earn the paychecks, raise their families, and help keep the stores open on Main Street will see their child tax credit and their guaranteed tax deduction slashed in half. We cannot allow for the success that has taken hold in Erie and communities all across our country to be rolled back or abandoned by letting the tax policies that have done so much for so many expire. Members of this committee are already working with our tax teams to protect families and small businesses from losing the Trump tax cuts next year. One of those tax teams, chaired by Representative Kelly, is the Community Development Team, which will focus on how we can encourage and incentivize more Main Street investment, expand housing opportunities, and support small communities so they can grow and meet the needs of families where they live and work. I want to thank the witnesses for taking time out of your busy schedule for being here today. And I also want to make sure that we have the opportunity to hear from everyone in the audience as well. There will be clipboards that you will see that will be passed out for everyone to share with us your concerns and ideas. We will enter into the official hearing record and take those back with us to Washington. So please get a clipboard, write down your information, and it will be submitted into the official record. It is a pleasure to be in Erie, Pennsylvania, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm now going to introduce our witnesses first. Mr. Drew Whiting, who is the CEO of the Erie Downtown Development Corporation. Shay Hawkins is President and CEO of Opportunity Funds Association. Jason Spore is founder and owner of Ippa Pizza. Tom Treadway is president of Erie Molded Packaging. Now, first of all, thank you all for taking time out of your lives to be with us today, because I think it's important for the community to actually hear the people who are on the ground working these programs and how it works for you. So thank you for doing that today. Now, your written statements will be made part of the hearing record, and each of you will have 5 minutes to deliver your opening oral remarks. Mr. Whiting, you may begin, please.
Chairman, ranking members, it's a privilege to sit in front of you on behalf of the Erie community and the Erie Downtown Development Corporation to thank you for providing a legislative catalyst that has changed the trajectory of our community for the better. The story of Erie over the last half-century is familiar to anyone acquainted with the greater Rust Belt region. A once proud manufacturing center on the Great Lakes with a thriving middle class became a shell of itself over several decades. Community decline, often measured and communicated in terms of population loss and other traditional economic metrics, is actually felt through the despair and the eventual apathy of its citizenry. A little less than a decade ago, Erie's private sector leadership, determined to reverse course, began designing a place to shock our city back to life. Opportunity Zone legislation, passed as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, provided our stakeholders a major tool necessary to attract investment required to execute on that plan. Today, we celebrate Erie as one of the best examples of OZ-enabled transformation, the beneficiary of federal economic development catalyst that has served as a model for many other communities across the country. In December of 2021, after living in Chicago for more than 14 years, my wife and I moved to Erie to be closer to family, hers in Erie, mine in Buffalo. We were working remotely, had no real plans to be involved in this community. But after landing in town, that notion very quickly changed. It was less than a week before we'd met new friends at the EDDC's flagship city food hall, joined Radius, a longstanding pioneering co-working community, and were introduced to members of our business community. From the bayfront to the tracks, I noticed scaffolding, cranes, announcements of new investments and projects throughout the community. More importantly, I could feel it. I could feel the buzz, the energy that can only be described as a feeling of optimism and hope about the direction of this community. That feeling led us to immerse ourselves in the community. Before we were here for even a year, we'd purchased an anchor building on State Street with the intent of contributing to the fabric of our new home in a positive way. That renovation has been done through an Opportunity Zone fund. Now, as the CEO of the Erie Downtown Development Corporation and as a fully converted believer in the potential of this city, I've joined the deep ranks of Erie evangelists who tout our quality of life, reasonable cost of living, amenity-rich downtown, and the resources that we possess on our bayfront and with Presque Isle State Park and beyond. While it's difficult to measure community pride, I can tell you that despite the hits this community has taken, that pride is coming back. Look behind me. A major reason for that is the forward progress that you all saw today, and that was enabled by your Opportunity Zone legislation. Established in 2016 to revitalize Erie, the Erie Downtown Development Corporation, under the leadership of private local stakeholders and John Persinger.
The chart's over there because I think it's impressive to see the return on that investment.
Spent $27.5 million of equity investment in the Erie Downtown Equity Fund, which was leveraged to invest in $113 million of development over the next 7 years. Phase one, as it's termed, nearing completion later this month, has resulted in development progress and attraction of external investment in a fraction of the anticipated time frame, primarily because of the catalytic impact of Opportunity Zone legislation. The chart you see over here says volumes. It's also important to note that it's beyond that. We've attracted over $100 million of other investment into this town from people that are not from Erie, that have no connection to this place. Ms. Moore, we are happy to report the above to you at any time. And under a more stringent reporting regime, we're happy to do it in even more detail.
And maybe closer up, too, next
Maybe
time.
closer up. In addition to that other development money that's come into town, we've also seen companies like Trucklight, Kyocera come into town, National Fuel make downtown their continued headquarters. They've decided to remain or move operations to Erie based on the positive progress that we're making downtown and the way that that progress is radiating outside of that core. Because of the progress we've made in Erie, I receive frequent visitors and calls from thought leaders in the economic development realm. Though each has its own approach, most convey some version of, hey, you've done a great job, but do not stop here. You need to do more. As you can see behind me with a room full of Erieites showing up to let you all know that we appreciate the work that you've done for us, we also want to let you know that we are committed to doing more. We do not view our work as an effort that will last a decade. We expect that we will be working for a generation or more to fully reverse several decades of decline. Thus, it's crucial that OZ benefits and other tax policy and expansion tools are continued so that we can progress as a region. Our story is not finished and we have plenty of work to do. We remain steadfast in our commitment to our mission. We've never been more motivated than we are today. Community pride in Erie is surging. A community now richer with hope and optimism for the future. Thank you for working in a bipartisan fashion to enable our work over this past decade and for many years to come.
Okay, thank you, Drew. Appreciate it, Mr. Whiting. Now we recognize Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins, you are now recognized. I will tap the mic when it gets down to where you're like 30 seconds left to go. As I know you all have a lot to say, and I hate to shut anybody off because it's your day, and it's our purpose of being here to listen to you. But Mr. Hawkins, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Moore, Chairman Smith, thank you for having me today. This is my 7th time testifying before Congress, but my first time testifying before the Tax Subcommittee, so I really thank you. And it's a special privilege for me to be testifying again in the heartland, as I was born and currently reside just an hour and a half west of here in Cleveland, Ohio. And I appreciate your comment, Representative Moore, that Cleveland is not a mistake on the lake. It's part of that freshwater kingdom you described. And so I really appreciate you all allowing me to be a part of this. So I am co-founder and president of the Opportunity Funds Association, a trade association whose members are entrepreneurs, investors, developers, and fund managers operating in opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are arguably the most successful community development policy in American history. So this afternoon, I would like to discuss how opportunity zones are targeting private investment in areas of the country that have been deindustrialized, and how tax policy can be used to build domestic supply chains, encourage reinvestment, and renew prosperity in places like Erie, but also in the often overlooked rural communities across this nation. Prior to co-founding OFA, I served as Majority Staff Director for the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Energy, Natural Resources, and Infrastructure, and as Tax Counsel to Senator Tim Scott, where I helped to champion the Investing in Opportunity Act, which became Opportunity Zones. Analysis from the Economic Innovation Group, using data from recent studies at UC Berkeley and our Treasury Department, found that by 2020, OZs had already achieved unprecedented geographic reach and scale. So just 2.5 years after zone designation, nearly half, half, or roughly 3,800 communities across every state had received investment, with those investments being among the highest need communities in the U.S. And so how can Congress help to reinvigorate and bring prosperity to Heartland? Well, first of all, we need to urge President Biden to abandon plans for any tax increases. Working families are already seeing tightening budgets and higher prices. Over the past few years, consumer prices have risen 19%, 40% for electricity, 30% for gasoline, 46% for car insurance, 51% and 30%, 30% for baby food. And so adding to this, the Tax Foundation estimates that we would lose 788,000 full-time jobs and 2.2% of GDP if the president's fiscal year 2025 budget were enacted, his proposed budget. And so, first, do no harm. In terms of opportunity zones, as Representative Moore indicated, it is critical and perhaps the most important step that Congress can take to optimize sustainable growth in opportunity zones. We need to pass a bill adding reporting and transparency requirements such as those found in the Small Business Jobs Act and those largely mirrored in Chairman Smith's Opportunity Zones Transparency Extension and Improvement Act. And so that is critical. We also need to jumpstart rural investment by allowing for intermediary investments in what are called feeder funds, which will enable more investment from smaller qualified opportunity funds in a fund-to-funds model that, again, will enable smaller, regionally focused, impact-oriented funds that are more likely to invest in rural areas and also solve the problem that Representative Moore noted with only large investors being involved in the process. And so we can solve that today. And lastly, we need to enact legislation, as my fellow witness noted, to extend this great policy. With that transparency and reporting information, we'll be able to better understand how opportunity zones are performing, and then you and Congress can tweak that to make this great policy even more effective. So I appreciate you having me today, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow witnesses and my discussion with you all.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Spore, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to start today by thanking Subcommittee Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Moore, Chairman Smith, and members of the Ways and Means Committee for allowing me the opportunity to comment today on the impact the Opportunity Zone in Erie, Pennsylvania, the policies that shape it, and the investments made by organizations who invest have had on my business. Ippa Pizza Napoletana was established in 2022 as a food truck with the central commissary about 1.5 miles down the road. I set off on this venture with the hopes and dreams of creating some of the best pizza in the region, the nation really. Like any business, first starting out, I have big goals. I have a mission, vision, values. Those all serve as my guideposts. Ultimately, I wanted to build something that my family could be proud of and that the Erie community could be proud of. I have a goal of supporting the local economy with purchase of my raw goods. More important is to build a culture inside of my organization where individuals who maybe didn't get the best start in life would find a place to work that would teach self-worth, leadership, and growth both personally and professionally. What started out as a dream in college when my mom actually laughed at me when I asked her to teach me how to make dough over the phone turned into an obsession. So where did the name Ippa come from? It came from my son Colby when he was 18 months old and learning how to talk. That's what he said. That's the way that he said pizza. He'd reach for this guy and say, Ippa, Ippa, reaching for another slice. He's truly a boy after my own heart. So I learned to make authentic Neapolitan pizza from a world champion pizzaiolo or pizza maker who runs 2 of the most acclaimed pizza restaurants in New York City. I took these learnings and have built a product serving naturally fermented dough made in part from locally sourced wheat from Pittsburgh. We source garlic and heirloom tomatoes and cheese curd from local and regional farmers and producers when in season. We compost our organic scraps with a local company and donate the fresh compost back to farmers who then again regrow our vegetables. All this is done not because it's easy or cheap, but because it results in a better product. We feel an immense sense of pride being one of the largest customers of each of these other small businesses and contributing to the local supply chains. If we can be a part of another business's success story, it's a good thing. And JFK once said, a rising tide lifts all boats. Like any small business, we faced challenges early. Specifically, we needed more employees and marketing. As almost a 50-year-old trying to learn the intricacies of today's social media, you'll find out real quick why marketing is a 4-year degree. I was also working and continued to work full time. So time management and allocation of resources had to be more efficient. We learned the limitations that existed in our current operation. We knew that if we were to become viable, we needed to transition into a brick and mortar operation as soon as possible. In short, we needed help. Upon all these realizations, I simultaneously learned of a potential opening in the flagship city food hall right in the middle of Erie, PA's opportunity zone. I began to understand what an opportunity zone was and how the investments made were truly a win-win-win for the businesses that invest in these depressed areas, the new business owners who touch the customers directly like myself, and most important, the greater community that ultimately becomes a vibrant place to live, work, and play. The companies who invest, like Erie Insurance, UPMC, Gannon, Mercyhurst, Plastic, the Erie Community Foundation, AHN and Highmark, the Hagen family, and all the local banks, they get deferred tax benefits. They get breaks on capital gains, tax breaks on capital gains. But it's not about that. What do they give? They give the citizens of Erie a new beginning, options to work, play, and shop. They give the opportunity to make the community in which they choose to operate great. They provide revitalization and make people want to work and live here, raise their families, visit on a vacation, and they give the opportunity for people like me to live the American dream. Ippa Pizza Napoletana relocated to 22 North Park Row in January of 2024. Remember when I said we needed help? The professionalism and guidance by Drew Whiting, the president of the EDDC, Corey Cook in the back there. He's the director of operations. Mark Inchko, director of food and beverage. Paula Gregory, the controller, were invaluable and just what we needed through this transition. What about marketing? The help afforded by Ryan Hoover, the experienced director, was one of the biggest surprises. When Ryan's in the building, our business gets highlighted to the greater Erie community and we make money, which is the lifeblood of everything we're talking about today. What about access to motivated employees and other business owners? Because of the groundwork laid several years ago, a transplant to Erie like me was able to grow fast, and I'm proud to say that we now employ 12 employees where we ran for a year and a half with only 3, and we're still hiring. At Ippa, our story is just getting started. So what happens if the tax provisions afforded investors in opportunity zones expire with no legislative action? I hope I've shown you what happens when this legislation is understood, appreciated, and acted upon. Everyone in this room understands where we were in this community, 16501, one of the poorest zip codes in the United States. A mentor of mine, Uncle B, once said, "Don't just come to me with a problem, bring a solution." One of the poorest zip codes, that's our past. Walk across the street and see the progress. You've heard the goals and the dreams and you see the action, and I'm not the only one. We're living the solution. With your help, we are fixing it. It's a win-win-win. Let's not go backwards, take action. We will make Erie great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Spore. Mr. Treadway, you are now recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the committee. My name is Tom Treadway, and I'm president of Erie Molded Packaging, a privately held, family-owned manufacturer founded right here in Erie, Pennsylvania. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss critical tax provisions with you today and welcome you to the Keystone State. For more than 40 years, Erie Molded has been creating custom injection molding parts and integrated packaging solutions for customers all over the country. My father, who was also an Erie native, had the desire to contribute to Pennsylvania's manufacturing sector after running a successful string of businesses on the West Coast in the 70s. He founded the company here in 1982 and has been a pillar of our community ever since. For those visiting our state who might not be familiar with Pennsylvania's iconic architecture, our state nickname is central to who we are as people. A keystone is in the center of an arch that holds the other stones in place. It is the strongest and most critical part of the structure. And once you know what, and once you know what they are, you will surely recognize the symbol across the state. The stone reflects Pennsylvania's historic and political importance in America's early years. The U.S. tax code also functions as a keystone for our great nation. Manufacturers across the country face unique challenges every day. When our keystone is strong, such as having pro-growth tax code, we are able to build something great. However, beginning in 2022, our tax code began to develop cracks, weakening the entire structure. Tax provisions that had either been in the code for decades or enacted as part of the 2017 tax reform began expiring in 2022, and there are more damaging changes on the way next year. A weakened tax code, severe worker shortages, supply chain disruption, and competition from abroad have significantly impacted Pennsylvania's manufacturing community. I want to thank all the members on this subcommittee who supported the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act earlier this year, and I'm calling on Congress to finish the job by getting this bill signed into law. This legislation would allow provisions from the 2017 tax reform, such as domestic R&D expensing, interest deductibility standards, and full expensing provisions to be extended until 2025. However, Congress has a major tax battle ahead of it next year, when crucial tax policies are set to expire, directly impacting manufacturers here in Pennsylvania and across America. In the years following TCJA, Erie Molded was able to invest nearly $7 million in new capital equipment purchasing, thanks to full expensing. Along with this much-needed equipment, we also were able to create new positions across our team and deliver high-quality products to our customers. Full expensing is already phasing out and is set to completely expire in 2027. This is devastating for our manufacturers and has caused us to delay our own equipment purchases. Another harmful change that went into effect is the requirement to amortize our R&D expenses rather than being able to deduct them in the year incurred. This is a massive change for us, as historically 90% of our R&D expenses went to our engineering payroll. That means that limiting R&D doesn't just limit innovation, it also has a direct impact on people's jobs here in Erie. Congress not allowing manufacturers to immediately expense R&D directly translate to fewer quality jobs in the manufacturing sector, while our foreign competitors are implementing vastly beneficial R&D benefits. This change also caught me and many other manufacturers in our community completely off guard. In 2023, a full year after the R&D change, I was presented with taxable income that was almost 6 figures higher than I had been anticipating. Changes like this mean I have to spend more time with my accountants and lawyers to figure out the best way to prepare for our future instead of growing my business. Finally, EMP is organized as a pass-through, meaning when the 20% pass-through deduction expires at the end of 2025 and the individual tax rates increase, our tax bill will be significantly higher. Many small manufacturers are organized as pass-throughs, so our sector will be disproportionately harmed by the expiration of this deduction, severely hampering our growth trajectory. Similarly, since many family-owned manufacturers consist largely of e-liquid assets, we are disproportionately impacted by the estate tax changes also coming in 2025. I urge every member of this committee to preserve those and other pro-growth provisions which allow manufacturers to function as the backbone of our economy and compete on a global scale. I once again want to thank members of this subcommittee for inviting me here today. I hope your time in our great state leaves you with a lasting impression as you return to work in D.C. and you keep the Keystone in mind as you debate our tax code's future. Thank you.
Mr. Treadway, thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. My first question is going to be from Mr. Whiting, and I think we brought the chart up. Ms. Moore, this is for you. Here.
It's a great chart.
Now, the reason we brought this forward, if you can see what happened, the taxes paid when these properties were acquired, taxes paid were $176,185. After the Erie Downtown Development Corporation investment, it was $2,278,400. So the end game to all this is, you know what, and I've been through this in my life. There's a couple times in my life I paid absolutely no taxes, and people said, how did you get away with that? I said, we lost money that year. Taxes are based on profits. And I think that sometimes we forget who it is. The old story, don't worry about the mule, just load the wagon. When you treat the mule the right way, the mule can pull the wagon a lot easier and a lot harder. So, Mr. Whiting, if you would explain a little bit, you're working in the Erie Downtown Development Corporation's mission, and I really miss Johnny Persinger for not being here today because I know how important he was to that, and how it's felt in downtown Erie. Are there examples of the progress and revitalization of downtown Erie felt in other parts of this community?
Yeah, I think we all miss John Persinger here, and I know he's going to be watching this, wishing he was sitting here as well. When I said that our work isn't done, I meant our work is not done. The new buildings that you saw on State Street today, The first one opened 2.5 years ago. That effort in the 2.5 years since has led to, in the 1 mile radius around it, over $100 million more investment. If you look at the 5 and 10 mile radiuses from that, you're starting to see that work as well with the announcement of Kyocera and Truck Light coming to town. A lot of the work in our neighborhoods starting to happen through the development of different CDC and other vehicles to get the neighborhoods ready for this kind of change. We are starting to see it radiate out, but it's not there yet. This is not a decade-long effort. This is a multiple generation effort that we're gonna have to undertake to truly do the work completely here. 10 years of an Opportunity Zone Act being in place is a great start, but we're barely at the quarter pole. Give us another 20 years, and you'll see a county that has felt the impact of this in a much more thorough way than what we're seeing right now.
Thank you. Mr. Hawkins, you played a pivotal role in the Opportunity Zone legislation in your time as being a member of the staff. Part of the Opportunity Zone legislation that was left out in the final package was transparency and reporting requirements. Opportunity zones have already become one of the most successful provisions of the Republican tax cuts. Can you speak to the importance of including these requirements and how it would further boost Opportunity Zone investment?
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. Transparency reporting requirements are absolutely critical. So what we know from a UC Berkeley study, a Treasury Department study, and some private information brought together by an accounting firm called Novogradac, that $100 billion at least in equity has gone into Opportunity Zones thus far. From the Treasury study, we have a feel for what percentage of each state's Opportunity Zones got investment. So for instance, Pennsylvania, be it about 44% of the designated zones saw some investment. And so we have some very broad understanding that the policy is being impactful in a positive way. But it's like looking through a car window with mud on it. And transparency and reporting legislation would essentially be like a windshield wiper, just pulling the mud off. And so, the legislation that we so deeply appreciate you introducing would empower Treasury to compare the performance of Opportunity Zones against areas that could have been designated as zones but weren't, and also compare the economic performance across a number of key metrics with the broader economy. And that will allow you all on this panel to tweak the policy, but with a clean window, if you will, with a full understanding of what needs to happen to make the policy even more impactful.
Could you speak maybe a little bit too on how the Opportunity Zone would have an impact on rural communities?
Yes, so that's absolutely critical. One of the things that we've seen, right now we have an entire Opportunity Zone map that gives us a feel again for how diffuse the investment has been. So certain states like Mississippi, 65% of their Opportunity Zones have seen investment. Places like Utah have seen significant investment. Montana, once again, above 60%. We've seen other states where you're looking at below 40%. And so one key element to drive that will immediately drive capital into rural Opportunity Zones would be this feeder funds or fund of funds addition to the policy. What it basically enables is it enables folks who don't know specifically where they want to invest or how to give that money to smaller impact-oriented funds that know exactly what they want to do. And in rural areas, you're more likely to see investment in operating businesses. In the dense urban areas, you're obviously, more likely to see investment in real estate. And so favoring operating businesses through feeder funds, favoring smaller impact-oriented investors through feeder funds and a fund-to-funds concept would absolutely jumpstart rural investment.
Thank you. Jason, I wanted to ask you a little bit. So without the Opportunity Zones, what would the future of Ippa Pizza be like? And I got to tell you, first of all, I think sometimes people misunderstand. You work full-time as it is.
I do.
Yeah, so this wasn't something that you were looking at and say, hey, here's a chance for me to really to get ahead, but you were still working at the same time and then developing it. I'm interested in where you got the recipes. That's really good. That's good to be able to get that. In my hometown, none of the Italians would ever share any of their recipes with anybody else. That's just the way they are. The Irish could give you anything they can give you. But if it hadn't been for opportunity zones, would you have been able to do this?
I'm a pretty resilient guy. Okay, I fight hard, and I sometimes I don't know when to give up. So I would hate to say no, but what I will tell you that the speed of what I've been able to do and how fast I've grown. Okay, the opportunity zone, the EDDC, the help that they've given and created for me has been paramount. No way I could do it the way that I'm doing it now.
Well, I got to tell you, so what you talk about never giving up?
Yes, sir.
That's not only true of you, that's true of this town and of this state and of this country. We never, ever give up. We refuse to lose. That's the key to it. Thank you so much. Yeah. Mr. Treadway, can you speak a little bit on the impact that R&D has had on your manufacturing business in the community that you work with closely? And if R&D was not extended into 2025, how would that impact business in the Erie area?
So we make proprietary products at Erie Molded, stock packaging. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but it does require a lot of R&D. And most of that R&D is actually tied up, as I said earlier, in wages. It's a lot of engineering, spending time trying to figure out how to make a product better or bring a new product to market. So, when that policy changed, it had been that way since, the mid-50s, it was one of the more frustrating tax policy changes I can remember since being a business owner. Because now I'm forced to take something I have to pay for right away out of pocket with cash, but expense it over 5 years. And so, again, myself and a lot of, other of my cohorts got a huge tax bill they weren't expecting. So, I think it's one of the more, it's such a critical piece of legislation, especially when you compare, or tax code rather, when you compare how other countries like China and a lot of European countries treat R&D. We need to do everything we can to incentivize it, because otherwise it's going to be more challenging for someone like me to make those investments.
Thank you. I think one of the things is we were going through Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in the very beginning. We were looking at what we were doing to businesses around America, and we were actually driving people out of our country because of our policies. The idea that we've turned that around and people are now saying, no, I'm going to stay in America, I'm going to continue to invest in America, and I'm going to look to the future to make it a stronger America. And certainly in the world we live in today, if we don't understand the importance of that, we understand absolutely nothing. I want to thank you all for being here. It's really good to hear from you, and we'll stay in touch. Right now I'm going to recognize my colleague from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And as you've all noticed, the clock has started moving now that I'm talking. So we're going to get through this pretty quickly. I just wanted to talk to you, Mr. Spore. You said that you learned at age 50 that marketing was extremely important. Why didn't you bring us any samples of that pizza so that we could assess and evaluate the value of this investment?
I will personally escort you after the hearing.
You just got to think. You really do. I just want to make a comment on just some of the things that our chairmen have said, because I'm the only Democrat up here, in case you guys didn't guess. And one of the things that the chairman of our subcommittee often says, and I even heard Mr. Hawkins talk about how corporations don't pay any taxes, people pay taxes, and it's passed on to consumers and so forth, and that the money that we call taxpayers' money that we return in the way of tax cuts is not the government's money, it's their money. Well, listen, I just want to point out that when we, for example, cut corporate taxes from 21% to 21% from 35%, under that tax law, that was taxes that were owed to the public trough to pay for stuff like foreign aid to our ally Israel, for defense, for veterans housing, which is woefully inadequate, nursing homes for our seniors, roads and bridges. So, yeah, it is money that is owed to all of us. And so when we have policies like the thing that we're discussing today, for example, we are deferring taxes taxes that would have otherwise been paid for the public good and providing them as tax breaks. So I do want people to know that, respect and appreciate that it is a tax transfer. Now, when the Republicans here talk about how Democrats and Joe Biden are going to raise taxes on all these folks out here who are facing inflation and so forth, and groceries and gasoline and so forth, I do want you to know that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was designed to provide those business cuts and make them permanent, like lowering the taxes from 35% to 21%. They paid for them within the budget window. I can't do a whole class because the clock is moving, but they paid for them by making tax cuts to individuals temporary. So whatever tax cuts were made for low income or middle class people were temporary, while business taxes were permanent. And Mr. Treadwell, in terms of Treadway, in terms of bonus appreciations, we all agree with that. Pass-throughs. I want you to know that all small businesses are pass-throughs and they deserve the benefit, but all pass-throughs are not small businesses. So we need to look at that legislation. We're not talking about that today, because 80% of that money that benefits these small manufacturers like you goes to big old corporations. Now, that being said, I again want to thank everybody for being here, and want to point out that I think that we have had very good testimony here of how we need to tighten this up, so that there's a match. Because what we have seen, and that's not been the case here in Erie and not in Milwaukee, but I hear places that we all love, like New York City or other places, where we're scratching our heads, Mr. Chairman, and wondering, was that the best investment of our tax monies that would ordinarily go into the trough to pay for toward our deficit or for whatever? And also rural areas. Mr. Scott comes from South Carolina, and so does Mr. Clyburn. They came up with the 10-20-30 formula. And so they both had their minds trained on making sure that those areas that were populated with poor people could benefit from it too. And I don't have any problem with most of this money going to real estate, but maybe we ought to put some conditions around it where we at least have some mixed use of it, so that if you're going to build gorgeous luxury apartments, maybe a third of them ought to be affordable housing, and get that mix in, since it is taxpayer money that is providing this extraordinary capital gains treatment. And as you notice, you see that clock there. That clock will not come on when he recognizes Mr. Smith here. So I yield back.
Well, that's the good thing about being in the majority.
That's it.
I know that can be offensive at times, but I also would like to point out that while you may not agree that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a great piece of legislation, excuse me, reclaiming my time. The most revenue we've ever been able to collect was during the TCJA. So as bad as it may be in some places, but I will tell you what, Ms. Moore, I will be glad to work with you, and I would appreciate it. It would have been nice if some other folks from the Democrat part of the committee would have been here today, as just opposed to yourself. They were all invited. I guess they didn't find time and didn't see that going to Erie was going to be that big of a deal. But I got to tell you, when we stop talking about Democrat versus Republicans, talk about Americans helping fellow Americans, I think we're much more successful in that. I try to stay away from that, and I think that most of us, I think that the country in general is so polarized. We need to get away from that. That is what's absolutely destroying this great, great country. So, Mr. Chairman, you're recognized.
Thank you. With the magic minute, I guess. It's great to be here to ask some questions, Mr. Whiting. You've had a front row seat to the way that the Opportunity Zone program has transformed this community in Erie. We can see the infrastructure when we were driving through the streets. You could see that there weren't vacant buildings. They were full. I wish that was the case in my home state of Missouri. It's not. But what has this program meant for the working families of this community, and what about just what has this meant to this community?
So I think I touched on it in my remarks, but I think it has allowed us to take the first steps of forward progress that this community has seen in 5 decades. And that forward progress inspires others to follow along. It creates a sense of optimism, creates a regained sense of community pride. And one of the things that we're really focused on right now, too, when we talk about working families and small businesses, is we're not operating a suburban mall food court downtown. Every business that comes into our footprint is locally owned, and we are giving them priority as they build out their businesses so that their families can live the proverbial American dream by growing something that's theirs and contributing to that economic multiplier effect that we're all striving for. The work that we need to do to ensure that those businesses have the tools that they need to be successful is the work that's going to make this all sustainable. That means we need to continue to have expanding tools in order to be able to do that, whether that's tools for businesses that are under a certain size, being exempt from certain taxes, investors in those businesses getting something back for their dollars in year one. Many states are doing it. There's no reason it can't be done at the federal level too. You guys have the tools. We're here to encourage you to use them.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. While Opportunity Zones have been an incredible success story for many communities, we now know that 95% of the Opportunity Zone investment has gone to urban areas. In the Small Business Jobs Act that passed out of the Ways and Means Committee last June, we included provisions to establish a new rural Opportunity Zone program more targeted to rural America. Given your extensive experience with Senator Scott and working on this program, what more should we do to ensure its success for rural communities? You kind of touched on that earlier, but what I want to make sure that we see these successes all over the country.
Well, the first critical step is built into that very Small Business Jobs Act is that transparency and reporting. And so we were glad to see that the transparency and reporting requirements in the bill you just noted mirrored those transparency reporting requirements in the Opportunity Zone Transparency Reporting and Extension Act that Chairman Kelly led. That is critical because then again we'll be able to make reasonable adjustments to the policy, but with a full understanding, a deep understanding of why areas are getting the investments they're getting and what should be done, what specific steps should be taken. So for instance, when you look at the data on affordable housing across the country, there's a clear trend that we see across the country, higher housing stock, but without an attendant increase in rents, right? But the transparency reporting requirements that you have in your bill would allow us to drill down into that and see why. Some governors prioritized affordable housing. They prioritized some areas over others. They had a certain outlook. You know, when you look at, say, a state like Colorado, where 75% of the zone saw investment, that was because of an intentionality on the part of local government that, produced certain results that they wanted to produce. So the first key step is that transparency legislation. That step is a step you've already both taken. The next step is that feeder funds concept that basically brings operating businesses to the front of the line. Operating businesses are what are going to be to get that number from 5%, to 20% to 10%, which directionally is what we want to do in these rural areas.
So the Opportunity Zone program has not operated in a vacuum. It was created as part of the the Trump tax cuts, which provided critical tax relief to working families as well as businesses that employ them, including research and development, expensing that was mentioned, which supports 21 million jobs, 100% immediate expensing on equipment, interest deductibility, death tax relief, and the 20% small business deduction of the 199A. Mr. Treadway, can you share how these pro-growth tax policies worked in tandem with the Opportunity Zone program to benefit your family-owned small business and others like it?
Yeah, the pro-growth tax strategies from the TCGA put us in a better position to thrive. We had good things going our way, but having incentive to do research and development, having incentive to make capital investments that we need as a small business to compete both domestically and internationally, all allowed us to put more money back into our employees, back into our company. Every employee at Erie Molded would tell you that the owners put everything back in, right? We're sending entry-level employees through education, through different classes in local colleges and local other educational institutions so they can get training that will carry with them all the way for the rest of their lives, right? And we were able to do that in a way we never had before. So it allowed us to hire more people, bring more people to this region. And then if you take a look at the opportunity zones, it made it a better place for those people to live, work, and play. Right? I've been back in Erie for almost 20 years. I've never seen so much excitement, so much investment downtown. And that's a big benefit because part of our business strategy is to retain and attract workers. So opportunity zones has had a huge impact in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Swikert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Moore. We all get titles. I want to walk through a couple things, and also, Mr. Kelly, I really appreciate. I've never been in this part of the country. I'm from Arizona, and my world is very different than yours. My county has about 400 or 500 new residents every day. So when you read and look at some of this data here, it's for me to get my head around what struggle really is like. But Mr. Hawkins, I want to walk through, and I don't mean to sound like a heretic because I partially come from the real estate world, but if I was to sit down with you and say, okay, the next generation of opportunity zones, you want more of the benefits to incentivize the actual employment engine than maybe the real estate side. We need many of these areas to have rehab, this and that, but one of my great concerns is how do I get the next generation of entrepreneurship, training, learning to show up at work, things like that, to actually also have investment, and sometimes investors who would be interested in that growing concern actually succeed. How would you design, in a short time, how would you design that type of feeder fund?
Sure. So you'll be familiar from the private equity world, even real estate private equity, the concept of a fund of funds. So where smaller fund managers, smaller investors are able to benefit from folks who are just coming in with larger.
But in some ways, that's two things. Over here, I have my accredited investor. Sure. You could actually take some of our updated accredited investor rules and make it so smaller individuals could participate in receiving the tax benefits, and maybe even you could design in there where you have small equity interests, so you actually have a benefit if the concern does well. I don't want to have a world where we've done amazing rehab in difficult areas or rural America where you built, fixed the building. I now need businesses in that. I need right. The next, folks of venture that bring in the next generation of talent.
And the next really exciting, exciting possibility is if Congress were to allow after-tax dollars to come into opportunity zones for the benefit of the 10-year If you hold an investment for 10 years, 10 plus years, 10 years and a day, then you get a 100% step up in basis. So think of it as no capital gains on the new business that you've started in an opportunity zone. So that'll mirror what we see in the traditional business, operating business investment, which will create more
jobs. But in your model in your head, is it to the business or is it to the investors in the business?
I'm sorry?
Is it to the business or the investors in the business?
So the gain accrues. So if I start Hawkins LLC, and let's say it's a social media company, and so I invest $1 million in capital gains into that, business. Obviously, I still owe my taxes on those capital gains, after the deferral period ends. But there's an additional benefit that says Hawkins LLC, that new business, if that business goes from $1 million in value to $10 million in value, and I hold that business for 20 years or 11 years, when I sell Hawkins LLC to, some larger company, there's no capital gains on the $9 million.
Okay, we'll have to whiteboard this because I'm not sure that completely gets my capital to run to the business, to finance it so we'll walk through that. Mr. Is it Treadwell?
Treadway, yeah.
Treadway. Or I could just read your nameplate. You actually said something, and this is one of my fixations for my brothers and sisters here on the committee. The 100% expensing, which we believe may have been, at least in the tax reform, single biggest driver of economic expansion, is a timing effect. You still, whether we make you depreciate something in 7 years or 5 years or in 1 day, you still get the same depreciation. It's a timing effect. The same thing on research and development. The perversity we have right now is you do research and development, you now have to finance it, and then later on you get to depreciate it over the years. So now in today's financing costs. So I sort of wish intellectually we could all sort of separate that those types of expensing, it's a timing effect issue that creates a virtuous capital cycle so you get more productive, so you can pay your workers more. So you see my personal fixation is what does the next generation of jobs really look like? And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Swiker. Now recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Estes, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. It's always great to get out of the D.C. Beltway and into the diverse communities across our great nation to hear directly from Americans who are helped or harmed by the policies that we write or vote on. While today's hearing focuses on the success of good policy, namely opportunity zones that were implemented in the Republicans' Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, I want to take some time to highlight a few other areas ripe for strong policy action from this committee that can help communities in the Rust Belt and beyond. We know that nearly all Americans in every tax bracket saw tax relief thanks to the TCJA. The legislation's business provisions boosted the overall economy. However, many of these provisions have begun to expire, and the rest are set to do so in 2025. In fact, President Biden has made it clear that he will let these tax cuts expire, even though doing so means violating his pledge to not raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000. This means that in my home district, hardworking Kansans can expect to pay $1,900 more in taxes in 2026. And right here in Erie, Pennsylvania, one estimate is that an average of over $1,700 will be paid in additional taxes, while Americans across the country will face similar or even greater tax increases. This would be on top of the historic levels of inflation that are currently crushing Americans and making it difficult to meet everyday needs. According to the CBI data released last week, inflation is up 19.9% since President Biden took office in 2021. Mr. Spore, as a founder and a new business owner and as a father, can you tell us how inflation is impacting you both personally and professionally, and how would additional tax hikes on top of this impact you and your company?
I mean, just to be brief, any time I don't get to make the decisions with the capital that I'm earning, I want to be able to make that decision. So it obviously, it gets harder, right? It gets harder. You already see that I work a lot of hours. I'm not afraid to work a lot of hours. Couldn't imagine adding more to that, so.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not just taxes that individuals will feel the pain if TCJA expires. Without action from the committee and Congress to extend and strengthen the business provisions in TCJA, businesses will be set back, hurting the economy, job creation, and workers. We've already seen evidence of this through the expiration of the immediate research and development expensing provision. Since amortization took effect, the growth rate of research and development has slowed dramatically from a 6.6% on average over the previous 5 years to less than 0.5% over the last 12 months. As companies spend far less on research and development, the sector is down by more than 14,000 jobs. 3/4 of research and development spending is on wages and salaries, making R&D amortization primarily a jobs issue. Mr. Treadway, as a businessman in the manufacturing space, can you tell us how the expiration of the provisions has impacted Erie Molding Packaging?
Yeah, I mean, for Erie Molded, I mean, again, the first year it sort of caught us off guard, so immediately we got a taxable we weren't expecting. Now, we can, of course, depreciate those expenses down the road later, but I need to make those decisions now and have that money to reinvest in my company and my people now. So initially, it was money out of our pocket that we were not expecting. Looking to the future, we'll still do some R&D, but we're going to look at it differently. It's different math now. Now, and like you said, for us, it's 90%. Sounds like industry average is 75% goes to wages. I know that the more I put into R&D, the more I'm setting myself up for a higher tax bill every year. And so it's going to change the math for us. So yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah, which makes it really damaging for your cash flow, as you highlighted earlier, in terms of having to pay out of your pocket this year for the research and development, and then not being able to write that off and on taxes to recoup that expenditure.
Yeah, for small businesses like ours, cash flow is everything. So yeah, it definitely changes the arithmetic for us.
Well, thank you. And this committee knows how important immediate R&D expensing is, which is why in January we passed the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act that included immediate R&D expensing. I'm still hopeful that my colleagues in the Senate will take up this legislation. And in the meantime, we'll keep pushing ahead to ensure the provisions are restored and strengthened in 2025 and beyond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. Now recognize Mr. Smucker from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is a great hearing. Mr. Whiting, and seeing what's happening in the community here, it was just so wonderful to see the commitment that's been made and the benefits that you're seeing. I represent Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. As many of you know, Lancaster County is Pennsylvania, other side of the state. But we had a similar. Years ago, I was in the state senate, and then I've been in Congress now for 8 years. And Lancaster City was in bad need of revitalization, and there was a catalyst of business owners there, similar to what I've heard here, who really we started with a convention center and then a ballpark, and then you saw the effects of that over a period of years and decades of that initial investment, that initial risk, and then it also took government help, because you just sometimes can't make that initial project work, but you see the benefits. And so really, really great to see similar things happening here, and I'm so glad that the Opportunity Zone is part of that. I also want to mention a business owner, Mr. Treadway, Mr. Spore. I've been a business owner for a long time, and really proud of the work that we did in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the impact. Appreciate, Mr. Treadway, you mentioned the 20% deduction, the 199A, which is really important for the pass-through organizations. I do want to go back to something that Ms. Moore said, and that is, some of the individual rates were not permanent, and I agree they should be made permanent. And in fact, they should have been made permanent from the very beginning. We weren't able to do that because we didn't have we didn't have Democrat support, frankly, in the Senate side, so we had to do it through the budget reconciliation process, which has specific scoring, and so we were not able to do that. But Ms. Moore and everyone else will have an opportunity to make those permanent, because we'd like to do that next year. We think it's very, very important. If we don't make these provisions permanent, it will be a big tax increase on the middle class. It'll be a tax increase on small business who are generating all the jobs, and so we we hope to have that opportunity, and we hope that that's done in a bipartisan way where we make these things permanent. It really should be. So I want to get back, Mr. Treadway, to the 199A. Like, we're going to have to build support for that. We're going to have to people understand, even business owners understand the impact of that. How do we build that? And we're working right now. We have tax teams that Chairman Smith has put together. We want to take this out and have people understand, the American people really understand the importance of this policy. You have any ideas for us? How do we get out and talk about this?
It's a great question, because it's not the most straightforward of all the tax codes, right? But it makes a ton of sense. And for small businesses like us competing against corporations, if we don't keep that in place, we're now losing another step on the ladder when it comes to how we're taxed. So, I mean, I know where I talk about taxes the most, just speaking my own experience. A lot of it's through trade organizations that I'm a part of, trade associations. We always have an accountant that's involved who's talking about just general talking points on how we should be planning for the future, which again can be a challenge because the rules change too often. We make these things permanent.
Sure.
And I think local training associations. There's one here.
We'll do that. I'm gonna cut you off because there's two additional points I want to make, and I only have a little bit over a minute. One, I'd love Mr. Hawkins, and I'm not sure I'm going to give you time to answer this, but we really want this program to improve, and we're going to have an opportunity next year to do that. So I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you can do it later. What would be some of the key things that you think would better ensure that this program is working for more communities like it's worked in Erie? The other thing I want to be sure of is that we're incentivizing new dollars that would not have been invested otherwise. So I'd love to at some point hear your thoughts on that. And then, Mr. Whiting, I'd love to hear from you. And I've run out of time, so you won't be able to answer either. But one of the things we learned in Lancaster, that it was a different thing to have all of that new development actually result in better standard of living for the residents of the city. In better jobs that residents were taking, and over time that's starting to happen. But we want to find a way to make sure that all this new development connects with workers and improves the lives of people in the city. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We don't have time. We found, as I said, it took a while for that to occur. And so, Mr. Hawkins, if you could even maybe provide to the committee your recommendations of key changes that we should make, and then how do we connect that to ensuring that all residents, not just business owners, because really the purpose of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the purpose of incentivizing business is to create great jobs and to raise the standard of living for the entire community. That's what we want to get to. So I'd love to hear from both of you maybe how that's worked here and what ideas that you have to ensure that happens. So thank you. Sorry I ran out of time, Mr. Chairman.
Because we're so limited, 5 minutes isn't really enough. But I hope this just begins a dialogue that you all feel comfortable doing with us, because the chairman's idea to begin with was to take the Congress out into the country so you could have a face-to-face talk back and forth. And I think what Mr. Smucker just talked about, there's so much more that we have to be able to sit down and talk about to see where you all are in this and how we can make the government truly work for you. I now recognize gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Erie today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for hosting us. Congressional Republicans know that pro-growth tax policies work for American families, for workers, and for small businesses. And following the 2017 Trump tax cuts, individuals and families reaped the benefits. Real wages grew by 4.9% in 2018 and 2019, the fastest two-year growth in real wages in 20 years. Similarly, from 2017 to 2019, more than 6.6 million people were lifted out of poverty, dropping the poverty rate to the 10.5%, the lowest level in U.S. history. The real median U.S. household income in 2019 rose nearly 50% more than during the 8 years under President Obama's leadership. And according to the Federal Reserve, low and middle income families received the largest increase in wealth during 2018 and 2019. And I don't want to disagree with my Democrat colleague, but when they talk about the $400,000 that people make and not having taxes raised on them, I would argue that according to the Congressional Budget Office, that the tax cuts that were signed into law by then President Donald Trump that are set to expire, that if they do expire, the vast majority of U.S. households would see their payments to the IRS increase. That the Trump's 2017 overhaul cut the corporate tax rate to 21%, intending to make it more competitive internationally. The law also temporarily cut the income taxes paid by most U.S. households, in part by trimming marginal tax rates and increasing the standard deduction. As a result of these changes, the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center estimated that a family in the 40th to 60th percentile of earners would average save $930 annually. And when we talk about the $400,000 as a mark, the fact that we're facing now 20% inflation means that that has eroded Biden's promise on wage increases, and it's pushed more people from the $400,000 tax bracket. So a salary of $330,000 now would be worth $400,000 in today's dollars. So that needs to be taken into account. But in the face of major tax hikes and looming sunsets, Republicans will take action to ensure that American families and small businesses are not hit by higher tax rates or watered down guaranteed deduction and child tax credit that's cut in half. I'm excited to get to work on the tax teams that this committee has put together and ensure we help create growth for small businesses such as the ones we saw today. One of the areas I hope to address is looking at how small businesses access capital and the threats we see from this administration. We even saw this a few weeks ago from the Treasury, who repeated misguided attacks on the carried interest loophole. We've also seen it in every single budget that's been put out by this president. Mr. Whiting, you stated a venture fund. You started a venture fund to help provide capital to small startup companies, to start companies. Can you discuss the challenges that some of these small businesses face and what would happen if we allowed the 2017 tax cuts to expire?
So the challenges that they face are in getting the risk capital needed to grow, not at the very early stage, not when they've reached a point of somewhat success and product market fit, but it's really in that space where they need angel investors and community investors to come to the aid of those companies. In 2014, I helped with some draft legislation for the Illinois Angel Investment Tax Credit. And I brought that up to people in Pennsylvania. We were there down in Harrisburg last week. That kind of a tax credit could be something that's really useful for everybody in this country and could be a federal type of thing. Would encourage additional investment in those businesses at those times. As far as the sunsetting of some of the TCJA provisions, I think opportunity zone funds can be used as a predicate to get in capital into these small businesses. It is not limited to real estate at the moment. There are restrictions, but I think that can be expanded.
All right, thank you. Mr. Treadway, we continue to see proposals from this administration, such as changing the long-term capital gains and qualified dividends at the ordinary income rate for taxpayers, which could potentially double the tax rate from 20% to 39.6%. How detrimental would this change be for small businesses looking to access capital?
I mean, it'd be a significant impact on companies like ours. You're taking that much capital, that much cash out of where we want to put it back in the business, back in our people, back in capital, and now we have to give it to the federal government. And that's money we need to do to remain competitive, not just against corporations who aren't pass-through companies, but also, of course, international. We don't compete in a vacuum. We compete globally. So it would be a major impact.
Thank you. Mr. Spore, in the few seconds I have left, we've also seen interest rates at a 30-year high. Can you tell me how that has affected your business in getting access to capital?
I haven't had to do that. So.
You haven't had, Mr. Treadway? Can you tell me how small businesses have been affected by the highest interest rates that we've seen in 3 decades?
It makes those loan payments a lot different. And again, it's factoring in the decisions that we're, borrowing $1 million looks a lot different today than it does before. So a couple of years ago, so now we have to, we aren't investing probably quite as much as we have in the past, before interest rates started to go hike up as much as they have.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from New York, Ms. Meliotakis, for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Opportunity Zones and Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, passed by the Republican Congress with President Donald Trump, were pro-growth, pro-jobs policies that benefit the American people and businesses. We saw real wages grow by 4.9% in the first 2 years that followed, making it the fastest 2-year growth in 2 decades. 6.6 million Americans were lifted out of poverty, dropping the poverty rate to 10.5%, the lowest level in American history. And in 2019, the real median household income rose nearly 50% more than during the 8 years of the Obama-Biden administration. But state politics matter just as much. And according to the Tax Foundation, state business climate in my home state of New York is number 49 worst out of 50. Here in Pennsylvania, it's 31. My state, New York, is home to 514 opportunity zones, and my district is home to 13 opportunity zones, 8 on Staten Island, 5 in Brooklyn. All of the Staten Island's opportunity zones are located in the lower income, mostly minority sections of the Staten Island's North Shore, which can desperately use the private investment in revitalization, which was the exact point of the program. But the lawmakers in Albany have prevented New York's opportunity zones from achieving their full potential. In 2021, New York stripped some of the state-level tax benefits created under the federal program, but left in a tax exemption on capital gains from opportunity zone investments that are held for at least 10 years. Last Monday, the state Senate voted, however, 41-20 to approve the measure fully decoupling the state from the opportunity zones program. And these are the same people that drove out the potential Amazon headquarters out of, Queens, even after the company said they would not reap the benefits of the deferred tax. So my question is to Mr. Hawkins, can you help my lawmakers in the state of New York understand what they're missing out on?
Right. What I would impress upon the state legislature there is that it is absolutely critical for the success of the policy. And when I say success, I mean in terms of benefiting the lives across a number of economic measures of the existing residents of opportunity zones, that they implement supportive local legislation to make sure that the policy is as effective as possible. When Congress passed opportunity zones, they gave governors who were designating the zones, who were picking the places where this investment could occur, 3 non-binding criteria for picking the zones. The first was an area where there was significant economic distress, areas that have been disrupted through technology changes or outsourcing or those kinds of things. Second, they asked governors to look for areas where there was opportunity, where an investor could turn $1 into $5. And third, they asked governors to look at areas where there could be mutually reinforcing state, local, and federal policy that could really help target these investments to the areas where they're needed most. And so certain states have been very aggressive. Next door in Ohio, our government implemented a 10% state income tax credit that can be literally sold at 80 cents on the dollar for all investment in opportunity zones. That allows us 2 things. One, it drives a lot of investment into the most distressed areas. But second, it allows the state of Ohio to track opportunity zone investment all across their state in the absence of federal reporting requirements. And so, I mean, I would emphasize to the legislature there in New York that this is a great policy that's changing lives, and they should absolutely support it in every way they can.
The private investment outweighs the cost to the state, number one, and you're creating jobs in these depressed communities, number 2. We saw it, Mr. Whiting, today. Appreciate the tour you gave us. We're seeing the private investment, the buildings that have been revitalized and now occupied, the jobs in the shops and the housing. And tax revenue is coming not by hammering people over the head like their ATM machines. It's actually coming because the community is more prosperous and there's more tax revenue as a result. So my last question is for Mr. Spore. You're absolutely right when you say New York City has the best pizza. Would love to know those 2 restaurants. You can tell me after. You don't have to say it on the mic. But thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you for letting us know where the best pizza is.
Got to be from Brooklyn and Staten Island, that's for sure.
Thank you, Ms. Miller-Tuckus. Next, Ms. Miller from West Virginia for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I think I'm at the tail end, as a matter of fact. I'm Carol Miller from West Virginia. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, for those of you who think about that. For some strange reason, I think it must be kismet, I decided not to go to Ohio State, but to go to a small women's college in Columbia, South Carolina. I met my West Virginian in South Carolina. 51 years later, I love West Virginia. I love the people. And a lot of you in this room probably have relatives either in southern Pennsylvania or in West Virginia. We are very much the same people. I think we've established the importance of keeping the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's so important, and what's coming ahead. I'm a small business owner. I shake my head. I mean, I bought apartments when I still had kids in diapers. I painted them when I couldn't afford somebody else to do it. I've been ankle deep in sump pump water. I've had my hands down the back of toilets. I'm a business owner. I'm an LLC. I am not a bad person for being a corporation. And I can remember those huge printouts. Every time I had to make a payment, I'd mark it off. My interest was huge. My principal was like $45 month after month after month. People who make policy don't often understand the risk that people in business take, small businesses in particular. And those small business people are the ones that support the Little League teams, that help the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. They're the ones that are reinvesting in their people and in their community. West Virginia is about 95% small businesses. So now I'll go back to my notes. I do represent rural West Virginia, and we live in a community that's very similar here. When I moved from Columbus, Ohio, it had 600,000 people, and my community had about 90, and I thought, what a charming small town. There are 50,000 people in my city right now. We have suffered from bad policy and bad ideas, but like these opportunity zones, they have become a very effective tool to help investment in our communities. I saw our glass plants. I saw so many plants leaving in the 80s and in the 90s because of policy. So it's so important that we do what we do. I'm an original co-sponsor of Chairman Kelly's Opportunity Zones and Transparency Extension and Improvement Act, and I strongly support it. Mr. Hawkins, thank you for working to help develop the Opportunity Zone policies. You know, we've seen the impact in our communities across the country, and it's really great to be here in Pennsylvania and drive around in this beautiful town and see the before, the during, and the after. I'm very impressed with that. So I do want you, Mr. Hawkins, to give us some of your wonderful ideas on how we can do better and how we can target in our communities. And I know we probably don't have enough time for you to give us those pearls because I've heard some of the things you've said, but it's just so important that, you know, we benefit from these opportunity zones. Mr. Whiting, thank you for being here, and I'm impressed what I've heard about Erie's development today, and got to be with you earlier in the day. We're redeveloping Huntington and Charleston along our main streets in our town. Can you explain how long it's taken for Erie to see the benefits of the Opportunity Zone program and why it's so important that it should be extended?
We're at the beginning of our 7th year of action on this right now, and I would say that we're probably a year and a half into seeing some of these benefits. It does take a while, and that's because development takes some time, and for the effects to take hold after that will take time as well. We need more time.
Well, housing is also a big issue in West Virginia and in my district, and we do have access to more recent data, which indicates the OZs have had such a significant impact on adding to our housing supply. And so, it's up from 8% before designation. So we also know that this new activity has a positive spillover in our neighboring communities. Can you also speak about your experiences of using OZs to address the housing shortage here in Erie?
Yeah, our OZ work has resulted in about 110 new apartments where 14 existed prior. It's also spurred on additional activity that has led to efforts at more supportive and low-income affordable housing around the community. We have something to work for here now. This is a place worth investing in. This is a place worth creating new housing in now. And so the organizations like the Hammett Health Foundation, the Community Foundation are doing that work. And I'm not sure that there would be the impetus to do it 10 years ago.
I agree with you. And Mr. Spore, I want some Ippa. Thank you, all of you, for being here and taking the time today. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Just before we quit, I was just talking to the chairman. So this is the 10th meeting we've had. And his idea from day one was to take the committee out of Washington and take it to the country so that you could have face-to-face contact. You could actually have dialogue. You could give us your true feelings on things. And I think if there's one thing missing today, it is our inability to communicate with each other on a calm level, actually exchange ideas. What's in the best interest of the people we represent? By the way, there are quite a few elected officials here today. They're all sitting in this. I appreciate you all being here. And where's Barry Koppel? Barry's in the back of the room. Raise your hand, okay, so we can say hi to you. There he is. There's Barry Koppel. Now, why do I bring that up? We had an opportunity to go through the most magnificent building. And people say, well, how in the heck did they do this? Now, remember that the Warner Brothers started this in 1929, not the best year for the economy in American history. Now, I thought it was fascinating because we talk about inflation. The Warner Brothers invested $1.5 million in the construction of this magnificent building with memories that last forever. When they replaced the front marquee, the cost of replacing the marquee, just the marquee, was $1.5 million. So that's inflation. But you all being here, the 10th meeting we've had around the country, I don't know that we've had a better turnout than this. And I want you to understand that if you have something to add, okay, so we have, I'll read this to you because it's important that you know this. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions and be answered later in writing. I want to tell the people that are here, we're going to be here for a few minutes. If you want to have any type of a conversation with us, please don't be shy. I've been in Erie. I'm kind of used to this after 12 years. None of you are shy. Please don't hesitate to interact with us. But for my colleagues, thank you all for being here today. This was really, really important to us, important to this community. Again, congratulations on everything you've done. With that, the subcommittee is adjourned.